Hello, everyone, and welcome to another amazing episode in our engineering leadership series. Today, I'm here with Grant. Hi, Grant.
Hey, Tracy.
So excited to always see you. Me and Grant have worked together across a few projects now, and it's always been fun to work with you in your fractional CTO and fractional CTO now roles. So,
Likewise.
yeah. Well, tell us a little bit about you, kind of where we can find you, bio of Grant.
Sure. Yeah. Quick background, started off as a computer science major, software engineer, all of those good things, specializing primarily in search, natural language processing before all that stuff was cool, probably. Went around and started a company called LucidWorks and was their CTO for all the way through to 2019, and then became the CTO of the Wikimedia Foundation. Most of you probably know that as the nonprofit behind Wikipedia. And then in 2021, left to go out on my own as a fractional CTO. You can find me in all the usual places. Just Google me. I'm on Twitter. I'm on LinkedIn. There's some GitHub accounts that I maintain from time to time, all of that good stuff. So
Nice. Well, thank you. And so, again, it's been really fun working with you in your fractional CTO roles and some of the projects. They've all been really fun and challenging. But, as a fractional CTO, you see a lot of patterns and anti-patterns when you kind of go into different teams, which I think is the most fun, right? Just,
yeah.
Wow, there's a trend. Did we even know that there was this trend that existed? But what are kind of some of the patterns or anti-patterns you see around engineering teams?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think maybe just taking a quick step back, and people may not even have heard of like what is a fractional CTO, right? And so I think it's helpful to even frame that. I mean, the name sort of implies it that, hey, there's this CTO out there and they're fractional, right? Like you cut them in half and they show up. And so oftentimes I'm brought into clients in a couple of different situations. One, they're a small business, often a non-technical owner, and they're like, hey, I've been trying to build this product and I just don't, I need help, right? Two, I often brought in cases where the existing CTO is leaving. And so I'm bridging the gap while they hire a new CTO. And so in those cases, I'm often running the team just like the old CTO and helping hire a new CTO. And then third, sometimes I'll do things like due diligence for VCs or private equity and those kinds of things where it's a very short project. Hey, Grant, we're trying to buy this company or invest in this company. Could you tell us whether the technology here makes sense? That's obviously kind of its own piece, but the first two have a lot of same patterns, right? Like if you've been building software for a while, software is hard. A lot of complexity. There's a lot of inner operating parts. You've got libraries you can control, UI you can control, but you also are using all these third-party libraries, et cetera. You probably have multiple teams. And so at some point in time, the software starts to kind of buckle under its own weight, if you will, its own technical debt, the collaboration required to maintain it, the number of servers to maintain it, all of those kinds of things. And so in many ways, my job is to help people figure those kinds of things out, often again in these transitory environments. So, the anti-patterns you often see, especially yourself not included, Tracy, there at this dot, is I often see, people bring in outsourced resources. They don't usually effectively communicate with them about what they want. So one of the things, for instance, I insist every client has is you have to have design up front. If you do not have a designer involved in your application, I will insist you get one or I won't work with you. It's a little bit of a hard line, but it's actually a lesson I learned the hard way. I did not, in my first startup, lead with design. And I won't say it was disastrous. We ultimately have had good outcomes, but it held us back for a long time because we did not have that user-focused thinking built in. We were very much like technologists building things. Other things I see is, they'll hire an outsourced team that the outsourced team is kind of, you have to be careful, right? The incentives aren't always aligned. Like if if their job is to just make sure that they're always maintaining this code base, well, for me as a CTO, that's a red flag. So I only want outsourced teams that know that ultimately, like, the client has to own this software, right? And they may still hire you to maintain it. Great. I may still keep you on to maintain it. But like, if you don't have that mentality as a dev shop that this company ultimately owns this software, then I don't want you, because those types always build in so much just jankiness into the software. They don't make good decisions. They often make very convoluted functions, things like
Is
that.
it because they think they're going to maintain it? And they like,
Exactly.
okay, so it's like they don't, they take, it's almost like they take less ownership in their code because they think the code is there. So they think that they'll be able to get away with it almost. But
It's
that
billable hours,
basically,
right?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So
And
it's
so,
almost like making crappy decisions so that you're always indispensable.
well, and in fairness to some of them, they're also under a lot of pressure to
Yeah,
deliver in a very short period of time,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
So, it's not always a negative, but it's like, hey, at least, you should be going in with this mindset that ultimately, it's the old Boy Scout motto:
Maintainability.
leave,
Yeah.
leave the campsite cleaner than you found it, right? And
Yes,
and
yes.
and so I look for that type of pattern in the teams that I'm hiring. I think that's why, I've often hired this stop, because, like, I
Yeah.
trust that you all are doing the right things. I've seen the code, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Um, I'd say another pattern is, similar lines to the designer, ultimatum, if you will, is the product owner ultimatum. And a lot of what I think people think are technology problems are actually product thinking problems. They don't approach it truly as a product. They approach it as like, hey, I've got this technology. I'm going to build this user interface. I'm going to put together these libraries. I'm going to store this data. I'm going to scale out on EC2. I'm going to use Kubernetes. Like, it's all these series of individual technology decisions, and it's not a holistic view of, this is the product that I'm building, and here's why I'm building it. Here's who my customers are. Here's what their needs are. And so they've kind of got things flipped, right? Instead of the technology serving the product and the customer, the technology department is serving the technology, if you will. And that often leads to, I think, really messed up incentives.
Yeah. I definitely feel that because we're helping this one startup where three really, really, really smart engineers, which is why they were able to raise so much money. And they were building and building and building, but again, just focused on the technology versus focused on the product, I suppose. But then, just like you said, which I didn't know that was your philosophy of the design thing, we came in and we started doing like user sessions with a designer as well. And it helped the three technologists on this team who were really smart get on the same page. And for them, that was actually probably the most useful thing we could have done for them, because I guess we were serving as product. So I don't know, maybe we need to like rebrand this dot and be like, well, we're product focused, right? Because
Yeah.
trying to figure out like what it is we do differently. So I love
A
that
lot of it's,
idea.
it's this resume driven development is kind of
Mhm.
the mindset that you see in a lot of places. And look, like, we all have to build out our resumes. There's no getting around that. But like, make sure that you're doing that for a reason and making sure it's aligned with the business. Right. So, it kind of goes back to what we were just talking about with the outsourced developers as well. Like, you've got to, the best thing you can do is make sure that this software is something that is maintainable and usable. And there's different levels of that in the way you do it, right? Like, sometimes you're building for, hey, I'm going to throw this away in 9 months, and you're going to throw it away in 9 months. And other times, like, this is your core business value and probably should last, at least 2 years, maybe 3, ideally longer, because this is the core of what you do. Right. So thinking through some of those things, I think, as a developer, like starting to have that in the back of your mind will make you a better developer too, and also allow you to grow in your career if you want to go management route or be an architect or principal engineer, that kind of stuff. So depending on whether you want the IC track or the management track, those are all valid things to kind of keep in the back of your head.
I like that. What about success? Like, how do you measure engineering success?
Yeah, this one comes up a lot lately. I feel like I have a number of clients who are looking and thinking along these lines lately. Especially, software costs a lot of money to build. And so helping people understand both how the teams are performing, the product is performing, and actually, at the end of the day, individuals are performing. That is part of this job as a fractional CTO. The interesting thing is there's more and more tools on the metric that help you, do things like Dora metrics, or I guess these days now there's this space metric thing. Folks who are familiar with like the research that's been done by a number of people out there on what is effective delivery of software. So you're starting to see companies that come in and hook up to your GitHub, your GitLab, your Jira, all of these things, and essentially try to give you a single pane of glass across all the different aspects of software development. So there's that aspect. And then I think there's the qualitative side as well of like working with product. Does this deliver value to your customers? And so you have to also instrument all of those pieces, right? So you're seeing, I think, ever more tools on that front that are like record every session, playback every session, analytics, machine learning across all of those pieces. And so I think, let's be real, people still struggle with what is success in software, right? Because we're in continuous delivery land, it's not like success is this, oh, hey, I shipped this and it's done for the next 6 years kind of thing. You have to not only be successful with whatever launch and release you're doing, but you also have to set yourself up to be successful across a longer period of time, because you then have to be able to iteratively deliver, right? And so success then becomes measured over the long term as well. And that can be a bit harder for people to see, because oftentimes, again, the incentives are meet this tactical short-term success criteria, and then they end up putting themselves in a really bad position later.
Yes, but it's always a balance. I mean, I've seen so many engineers like, got to make this scalable, got to make this, because, 10 years down the line, we're going to have this issue. And 1 year, what about this? What about if we get 10,000 users, we're going to have to consider this. And it's like so nuanced to how to make the right technical decision. And you're not always going to be right, but it's like, how do you architect something and not over architect it? Scale, but like not, scale like crazy. And some tech debt is okay. And,
I think
sometimes
actually,
it's not. How do you deal with all that?
Yeah, I mean, tech debt gets a bad name in a lot of ways. And I think it stems from, in some regards, like all the best engineers I've always worked with, I always hate the code that they wrote 6 months ago. And so you kind of have to talk them back off the ledge of like, hey, 6 months ago, like you knew this and now you know that. So of course you think it's not as good. And there's 27 new frameworks out in the meantime anyways, right? That all do this thing for you. And so I think one of the mentors I had really helped me frame this stuff. And it kind of goes back to what I just said of, is this something that needs to last 3 weeks, 6 weeks, 6 months, or is this something that needs to last 5 years? Your core business value proposition, you should architect really well, I think. And, maybe not when you're in the early stage of a company and you're an MVP and you're just trying to get something out, but as you reach some level of user attachment, right? I think, you can start to make these longer term investments of like, this is the core of our algorithm. And we can start to think about how do we scale those pieces, or how do we make sure they're bulletproof, or whatever it is, right? Whatever your criteria is. And then all of the other things that are in orbit supporting, you can kind of ask the typical buy versus build questions. And of course, these days it's even more interesting because what you're seeing out of software is there's a lot of decisions around just simply assembling software as opposed to, I think, building software. The difference between assembling software is taking and wiring together a bunch of existing services to then build a new service, versus like just raw building. You're going to build up this fundamentally new thing from scratch. And so you're going to build all the core libraries, et cetera, right? So depending on what type of application you're building and the requirements for it, you might choose to assemble way more of it versus build from scratch way more of it, right? And so that's another thing, like as a leader or as an engineer, you have to be able to work through. Whereas 15 years ago, you built everything yourself because there wasn't much of an ecosystem, or not as much, right? Obviously you had open source, but you didn't have all of these services that already offered really nice SLAs and things like that.
Yeah. Well, going to take a real quick break to continue before we continue our discussion. Wanted to go ahead and thank our sponsor, This.Labs, which is my company. I'm so happy that my team lets me work on these things, like this topic right now. We're a development consultancy. We work with amazing customers like Stripe, Xero, Wikimedia, DocuSign, Twilio, and we really try to take a hands-on approach by providing tailored development strategies to help your most pressing challenges. So we love a good challenge, which is why I think we like working with you, Grant. We're like, we can solve this problem. But, whether it's, it's like a good and a bad thing, our life would be easier if we didn't like these challenges. But we really try to bridge the gap between business and technology. So whether you're modernizing legacy systems or, needing help kind of with any uplift, generally, we have a lot of experience with that. So you can check us out at thisdot.co. That's thisdot.co. So, Grant, my next question is, how did you get into your role? How might others get into the role? And what advice do you have with people kind of trying to get into the CTO role?
Yeah, I mean, and I think some of this fits with some broader career advice that I typically think about, and actually ties into your little ad snippet there, Tracy, because I think, one of my early lessons in my career was, I can remember at the time I went and interviewed for a job that just felt like it was going to be very stagnant over time. I was going to be doing a lot of the same thing over and over and over again. And after I learned probably the basic ropes of it, it would just be the more and more of the same. And so I walked away from that interview that I ultimately declined the offer for with hey, Grant, work on interesting and hard problems, right? So once that starts with that, and that was, I don't know, I was 22, I think 23 when I had that realization. So the very early days of the .com era, or kind of the mid days of the .com era, way back when, for those of you who are too young to remember. But that stuck with me as kind of the foundation of my whole career. I just happened to be fortunate enough to land in the search and machine learning space, which is and still is one of the single hardest problems we have in tech, right? So if you combine working on hard problems and then starting to find companies that allow you to work on those hard problems, and maybe you don't get to right away, but by showing up and being useful, you often can work your way into those roles. The second part of how I think about my career has actually been a hindsight observation, which is I'm very much, not everybody's this way. I've interviewed a lot of people about careers over the years, and I'm very much a guided exploration type person. That's kind of become my own career motto, is I follow what interests me, as opposed to I'm not one of those that has a 5-year plan or a 10-year plan. I never set out to be a CTO, frankly. I had no dreams or visions of senior leadership when I was that 22-year-old. I thought I'd be a coder the rest of my life. And then just so happens I fell into doing a startup. And so the easiest way to become a CTO is to do your own startup, right? It's a kind of a joke, but it truly is, right? You want that title? Go start your own company and you can give yourself whatever title you want, right? And so that's how I first got into that role. Actually, even when I started the company or co-founded it with 3 others, I did not have a C-level title, but eventually, as that company grew and there were some changes in management, uh, I came into that title as part of just being a founder at the company, right? And even there, I think a lot of my own role was like, we need somebody who could talk to customers. So I went and did that. We needed somebody who could lead up the machine learning group. So I went and did that. It's just like putting yourself in the position to be able to be helpful to a company, right? And so then from there, I mean, I think all along the way, I've had imposter syndrome. Like, I didn't think I was qualified for the Wikimedia job. I mean, that's a top 10, world beloved website. I'm like, really? You want me to be there? But once I got in there, like you learn, you set yourself up for success by learning as quickly as possible. You try to make, as you go up the chain, if you will, from say individual contributor to engineering manager to director to VP, you're kind of, I think a lot of people get stuck by the fact that they're like, hey, I've got my own little world that I've got to take care of, right? Ultimately, your OKRs, whatever your goals are usually focused around delivering towards what your team and the people under you have. But the people who really, I think, get to the next level and further up, they start to have that much broader vision. They, especially in technology, they move beyond thinking about just the technology, right? Like, and I've met all along throughout my career, a lot of VPs even who are like, or SVPs who are like, hey, well, hey, I care about this technology and I care about making sure that I'm maintaining my budget and my team size. Personally, I've always hated that kind of thinking. I see so much of it in big companies. Oh, well, let me make sure I make decisions that maintain my sense of power. And to me, it's a career limiting move, right? Because ultimately you're showing your company that you care more about yourself than the company. And why would I promote you to the next level if all you care about is yourself? Well, there's a certain amount of, okay, I want this person to be hungry and grow in their career, but you've got to demonstrate that you can think beyond your world. And so, like, there's been cases where I'd be like, hey, I've got some resources that we can use over here, et cetera. Like, I'm willing to give these up because they don't make sense for the company. What makes sense for the company is to have more salespeople, for instance, because we need more coverage of our territories. Those kinds of decisions, I think, show that you're ready for that more strategic level, because I think especially at the C level, yes, there's still politics, there's still competitiveness, all those kinds of things don't go away. But that ability to interact and collaborate and figure out what's the best for the company then will determine how successful you are at moving up those ladders. And again, you still also have to play the usual politics games. None of that goes away. But I think as long as you know what your core values are as you go up through those and you stick to them, you'll do all right. And if you can't stick to your core values, then is the climb really worth it anyways? Sure, the paycheck's nice, but if you can't, live with yourself, then maybe you don't want to be the C level.
Yes. I really like that. I mean, that whole idea of, so like, let's say there's, an SVP of engineering at an organization and they're trying to get to that C level. Your advice is first starting to collaborate with other departments. Or, I mean, how do you start thinking or being involved in those conversations that allow you to do that and show that you're ready for the next level?
I mean, it almost always, again, comes back to that hard problems question, because anybody can fill the role when things are good, right? It's often in the hard situations, people are coming or going. There's these transitionary moments or inflections in any company and in individual's career, and they almost always coincide with something is not going well. Yes, there's the cases where the company's growing like crazy and you can just kind of step up and grow with the company as it goes. And it's still hard. That's usually a case of work hard and be there, be aligned with the company. It's those transitory moments where you know somebody's leaving and maybe not on good terms, where like you can step in and just show like you're a team player and you are willing to make the appropriate amount of trade-offs to make sure that the company survives and or moves to the next level. So those are often really good points for those pieces. And so the question becomes, well, how do you position yourself in there? And again, I think it goes back to both hard work, obviously, as well as willingness to say, hey, I can contribute here. And, let's face it, you also have to kind of bring solutions along with you. And so then the question is, well, how do you come up with those solutions? And I think a lot of that comes from being informed of the things that are going on. And again, you have to, at the heart of this, at least in my opinion, do this in a genuine way. Like if I'm just coming to you, Tracy, and be like, hey, Tracy, tell me all the things that matter to you. And it's just very self-serving. Like, yes,
People can smell like inauthenticity everywhere.
I think a lot of people smell it out. Now, clearly the world has plenty
it's
of
like, oh, you're climbing.
Yeah.
I'm not into it. So you have to like truly care.
I think the world has plenty of examples of people who still do that and kind of, make their way through it. I just have never like wanted to be that kind of approach, right? Like I would rather not have the next level position.
Yeah. I mean, I love that too, right? Because you're still going back to like your values, right? Because I remember when I was fundraising for my first startup, I was like, oh my God, I have to like talk to these VCs that I don't want to. I have to try to get into the boys club. And then it wasn't until I met, my first investor, he was like, no, you don't. You can find people that you like. Like there's and I did. I found amazing people that I really loved. And I didn't feel like I had to put on a face or be fake or compromise my values or like whatever else it was to do something that I was passionate about. You're saying the same thing, like in corporate or in your role or, wherever you are, making sure that it continuously aligns, because otherwise you can get the role, but if you're not happy, then what are you doing, right?
Yeah. Well, and and in fairness too, is like there's often ways you can reframe things too, of like, hey, I don't know that I want to, maybe that's not my value, but like sometimes it might still actually be your value. You just aren't thinking of it in a way that
I like that
allows you to see it. So I think you continuously have to be evaluating your belief systems around,
or like talking to advisors so they can reframe things for you, so that you're not stuck in a loop of maybe your value system or what you believe your value system to be is not actually the right approach, or you're not thinking about the right way.
That is so very true. And that's, that's been one of just my own lessons throughout my career is like, I think early days of my startup, I often felt like, well, in hindsight, I was holding us back because I had a certain view that, this is this technology and this technology can do all of these things and, and bam, 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 technology. And like I said, I missed things like the design thinking, et cetera. And I was holding us back because I was so centered around this particular way that I was trained in doing and this particular way of interacting with people and this particular way of solving problems. And it was holding me back. Other things, it's not like the C-level is the be all end all of everything. First off, I can tell you C-level is very lonely. Nobody cares. Right? Like nobody cares that it's lonely, right? You get this big paycheck. So nobody's going to feel sorry for a C-level, right? But it's actually a very lonely position. So if you really like having friends at work and collaborating at work and feeling like all of those things, it can be hard to do that sometimes at C-level. It's not impossible, but you often have to cultivate a network outside of your immediate company in order to feel like you have peers that you can talk to about the problems you're facing in your role, right? Other things that come through, I think, at the end of the day, like you got to be good at budget. and you've got to know what parts of the budget you care about. And so, like, especially if you're not a finance person, like, go spend some amount of time getting educated on the basics of corporate finance. I don't think you need an MBA or anything like that, but you should know what a balance sheet looks like, and you should know where your spend is within your group. And you should be able to be in the room with like a CFO or a VP of finance, and you should be able to work through in reasonable ways trade-offs that allow you to show that you're aligned with not only making sure you deliver a good user experience, but also you can meet your numbers, right? Other things I think really helped me. I was willing to do sales. A lot of engineering people hate sales. Sales is absolutely pivotal and crucial part of any company, and like getting out on the road and actually being a part of that and seeing how it works allows you again to have that view of the rest of the company. And so like working through those things I think are really important. And then, at the end of the day, I don't know, can we don't be a jerk, I guess, right?
Yes.
Like, be reasonable to work with. At least that's an executive I want to work with. I know there's companies out there that are cutthroat as all can be, and that's great. Like, if you love that stuff, go do it. I personally don't, so maybe that's why I'm not,
But you're doing what you love, which is important, right? You like your life, so that's the most important thing. Well, cool. I wanted to give a shout out again to my company, This.Labs. We really love helping bridge the gap between business requirements and tech implementation. So whether it's like sustainable application architecture, something we love to talk about, or you need experts in the field, we have tons of experience in that. So you can check us out, this.co. And thank you so much, Grant, for being here. It was really fun chatting.
Yeah, thanks, Tracy. And if anybody wants to talk careers or is looking for a fractional CTO, happy to.
Yes, I know. And what's your website again?
Well, I'm in the process of actually launching a website. It will be Develomentor, so no P in that, develomentor.com, or just find me on LinkedIn. That's the easiest way to get in touch with me. I actually do read my LinkedIn messages most of the time.
Nice. Awesome. All right. Thanks for joining.
Thanks, Tracy.